Arabella's wedding wine still tasted of honey and cloves when her mate stood in front of the entire hall and called her blood unclean. The drums had been pounding for the moonbinding dance. Wolves had been laughing, tossing winter berries, banging goblets against oak tables while snow packed the windows from outside. She had been warm then, one palm braced under the curve of her belly, the other wrapped in Darian Vale's hand as the priestess braided their red marriage cord around their wrists. Then Darian yanked his arm free so hard the cord snapped. Silence slammed through the room. He held up the torn strand as if it were something rotten. "I reject this bond." Arabella stared at him, unable to make sense of the words. Their bond had stirred at first moon months ago. Faint, undeniable. He had sworn the ceremony would make them unassailable. He had kissed her temple and murmured, "No one can touch you once you're mine." Now he stepped away from her like she carried plague. "Darian." Her voice cracked. "What are you doing?" "Saving my pack from tainted blood." He turned so everyone could hear him, jaw set in grim righteousness. "She lies about the child. This is no rightful heir. She has been compromised." A murmur rose, ugly and hungry. Her aunt covered her mouth and looked away. Men she'd grown up with avoided her eyes. One of the elder women spat on the floor by Arabella's slippers and hissed, "Should have known. She was always too proud." Arabella's wolf surged under her skin, frantic, injured. "You know that isn't true," she said. "You know whose baby this is." Darian's smile was a knife. "Do I?" Laughter broke out at the nearest table. The priestess reached for Arabella's hand, then withdrew before touching her, as if fear had burned through ritual duty. "By pack law," she said shakily, "a rejected bond voids protection." "Please," Arabella whispered, looking to the alpha dais where Elder Bram sat like carved stone. "I'm carrying. You cannot put me out in storm season." Bram didn't blink. "You should have considered that before shaming us." "I did nothing." Darian moved close enough that she smelled cedar oil on his collar and the cold iron scent of his cruelty. Under the table noise, he spoke so only she could hear. "Nikolai Starfall made it simple for me. One rumor and everyone chooses safety over scandal. You should have miscarried quietly weeks ago." Her lungs locked. He stepped back and raised his voice. "Take her from my hall." Hands grabbed her arms, hard. Male hands, pack enforcer hands, indifferent as shackles. Someone tore the white bridal cloak from her shoulders. Someone else flung a gray stable blanket at her feet as consolation. She bent awkwardly, protecting her belly, trying to gather it around herself while wolves watched the spectacle with relieved contempt. "Don't touch me," she shouted, kicking as one enforcer shoved her toward the doors. A fist drove into her ribs, not full force but enough to steal breath and dignity in one neat blow. "Walk!" he snarled. They marched her down the front steps into pre-dawn darkness. Snow knifed through her thin dress immediately, soaking the hem to her knees. Bells from the tower rang sixth watch, while the packhouse doors closed behind her with a final padded thud. She stood in the courtyard, shaking, while Darian came out one last time with 2 witnesses and a scribe. Legal theater. The scribe unrolled parchment and read in a monotone. "Arabella Ashford, rejected mate, expelled by decree under suspicion of blood taint. No claim upon den, title, or stores." Bram pressed his ring seal into wax. Darian crouched in front of her with mock gentleness and tucked the torn red wedding cord into her numb hand. "A keepsake," he said softly. "You won't need much where you're going." She tried to slap him. One enforcer twisted her wrist until her knees buckled into snow. Her belly tightened painfully, then again. A hot slickness spread between her thighs. Fear ripped through her sharper than cold. "Please," she gasped. "I'm bleeding. I need the healer." "Leora, please." She looked to the healer woman by the doorway, a mother of 4, once kind to her. "Please, check the baby." Leora stared at the ground. Darian stood and turned his back. "She's already lost it," he said, loud enough for the witnesses. "Write that down if you want mercy in your records." The scribe hesitated only a heartbeat before scratching ink across parchment. Already lost it. A clean lie, spoken once and made official. They dragged her to the outer gate and shoved her beyond the ward posts. When she turned, pounding on the iron bars, the guard captain gave her a bored look. Go die somewhere our pups won't see. The gate slammed. Arabella stood in storm-thick dark with one torn blanket, one broken wedding cord, and a child still moving inside her. She lasted a day and a night in the birch hollow west of Ashford Lands, huddled under roots with snow collecting in her hair and blood drying stiff on her thighs. She chewed frozen cattail pith. She drank meltwater out of her cupped hands. Every cramp made her fold over herself and bargain with every moon spirit she knew. Not now. Please, not now. Just keep her alive. I can hurt later. By second dusk, she heard riders. Not hooves, wolf feet. 3, maybe 4, cutting through crusted snow above the hollow. Ashford patrol by the cadence. She froze, breath shallow, palm over her belly to still the child's sudden kicking. Voices drifted down through branches. Message already sent to Grey Ridge and South Fen, one man said, breathless from the climb. Same wording as ordered. Miscarried during exile. Another snorted. Convenient. Necessary. If Shadowfang scouts hear she's still carrying, the king might sniff around. A third voice, younger, nervous. Why would the Alpha King care about some cast-off? Because Nikolai says he should, the first one replied. Stop asking. Nikolai. The name hit like a cold nail in her spine. Darian had spoken it too, smug and certain. Whatever this was, it was bigger than one cowardly mate protecting his pride. Snow shifted above her. A face appeared between roots, eyes widening. There! She bolted. Branches whipped her cheeks as she climbed from the hollow and ran downslope, half falling, half sliding through black pines. Pain knifed across her lower back. The baby rolled hard inside her. Behind, wolves crashed through brush and shouted, Alive or dead, don't let her cross the eastern line. A howl split the air. Arabella veered toward ravine country where scent ran strange in the wind. She had hunted these ridges as a girl. She knew where ice-bridged creeks and where deadfall could hide a body-sized space. She did not have speed left, but she had memory. An arrow hissed past and buried in a trunk by her face. Stop, someone yelled. You're making this worse. Worse than what? She thought savagely. Then writing my child dead while she's kicking my ribs? She clutched the broken wedding cord in her fist so tight the frayed threads cut her palm. It was useless as weapon, useless as proof. But it was the only thing no one had managed to take. The ridge dropped suddenly. She skidded, slammed to one knee, tasted blood, and forced herself up again. White blew sideways in thick sheets now. The storm had deepened into mountain fury. Visibility collapsed to a few body lengths. Good. Bad. Both. She reached the old boundary stones near midnight. Half-buried menhirs carved with marks no Ashford wolf crossed without permission. Beyond lay Shadowfang territory, hard, militarized, ruled by Tobias Shadowfang, Alpha King and war-born terror of 3 provinces. As a child, she'd heard stories. He broke traitors with his bare hands. He never forgave insult. His wolves hung enemy banners from ice cliffs as warning. She also knew one more story, quieter and rarer. No one starved in his winter camps, not even enemy pups. Behind her, the patrol voices had faded, unwilling to violate his border in storm dark. She staggered forward anyway, because dying under Ashford law and dying under Shadowfang law were different deaths, and one of them might include a healer. The first step over the stone stole her breath with a strange pressure, like walking through invisible water. Her wolf shivered. Old wards recognizing blood, scent, intent. Then she kept going. Hours blurred into white and pain. She lost a shoe in drifts and could not find it. Frost gnawed 2 toes numb. Her fingers swelled and split where she'd clawed at ice. She talked to her daughter in ragged whispers to stay awake. Little moon, stay with me, kick if you hear me. A weak thump answered. She cried without tears because the wind froze them before they fell. By dawn gray she saw lights. Far below, fortress lights cut into the mountainside like a crown of embers. Shadowfang's stronghold. Real. Too far. She tried to descend and fell hard, tumbling into a runnel of powder and stone that swallowed her to the waist. She fought out, crawled, stood, fell again. Blood soaked her inner thighs warm, then turned cold almost instantly. Her contractions were still erratic, not labor yet, but close enough to terror to make her retch bile into snow. The world narrowed to sound, wind, her own pulse, the thin, broken breaths she dragged in and out. Then another sound entered, deep, rhythmic, purposeful. Wolves. Not Ashford cadence, heavier, disciplined, Shadowfang patrol. She tried to call out and managed only a hoarse animal noise. Shapes emerged through the snowfall, huge gray bodies first, then armored figures on foot, cloaks dark with ice, spears lowered on instinct when they saw movement. "Hold!" a woman's voice snapped. Arabella lifted one hand from her belly in a weak surrender. In the other she still gripped the red cord, now dark with blood and snowmelt, wrapped around her fist like a garrote. "Please," she whispered, "I need—" Her knees gave out. She dropped sideways into drifted white. Boots pounded closer. Someone cursed softly at the sight of her stomach, the blood, the frostbite blackening skin on her bare foot. "Get the king," the woman ordered. "Now." Arabella might have blacked out for seconds or minutes. When she opened her eyes again, a new silhouette stood above her, tall enough to block the storm, broad-shouldered beneath a black fur mantle rimed with ice. Power rolled off him like heat off forge metal. Even half dead, her wolf recognized rank and bared throat without command. Tobias Shadowfang crouched, gloveless despite the cold, and looked at her as if trying to place a face from a dream he'd never admitted having. "Easy," he said, voice rough as gravel and unexpectedly low. "I have you." No one had said words like that to her in days. Maybe ever. He slid one arm under her shoulders, another beneath her knees, careful of her belly, and lifted. The instant her weight settled against him, something tore open in her chest. Not pain. Impact. A white-hot silver line lashed from sternum to spine, ringing through her skull like struck metal. Pine smoke and winter iron flooded her senses, clean and devastating, drowning blood and fear and snow. Her wolf surged to the surface with a cry that was recognition and panic in equal measure. Tobias froze mid-step. His pupils blew wide. He made a strangled sound, then dropped to one knee in the snow as if the mountain itself had hit him. His grip tightened, reverent and furious all at once, around her and the child between them. When he spoke, the word came out like a vow and a threat. "Mine." Arabella's mind fractured around the impossible. Cast out bride, bleeding exile, baby declared dead by liars, and the most feared alpha alive was holding her like she was sacred. Sacred. And she did not know what to do with sacred. The storm screamed around them, but inside that one word the world had gone suddenly, terribly still. Tobias stayed on one knee in the drift, holding her as if a wrong movement might shatter something old and holy. His eyes, a hard winter gray when she had first seen him, flashed molten gold and then back again, wolf and man wrestling for control. He dragged in a breath so sharp she heard it over the wind. Behind him, his patrol had gone dead silent. "Your Grace?" the woman captain said carefully. He did not look away from Arabella. "Mine," he said again, lower this time, as though he was testing the shape of it against his own disbelief. His gaze dropped to her blood-streaked dress, to the hand she still had clamped protectively over her belly, then snapped back to her face with a violence that made her pulse jump. "Who did this?" The mate bond answered before her mouth could. It burned through her chest in silver threads, tugging, demanding, alive. Warmth spilled from the center of her ribs despite the cold. A fever heat that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with recognition. Her wolf pushed against her skin, not in panic now, but in wild, aching need, whining, there, there, there. She recoiled from it instinctively. No, she rasped, shaking her head through the motion made black spots swarm her vision. No, I can't. You can't what? Be fated again? Trust again? Survive another male promise? Tobias's jaw flexed. Look at me. She did, because command sat in his voice like steel. Their eyes locked. The pull doubled, a line going taut between them, hot, electric, intimate in a way that made terror and desire collide inside her until she couldn't separate one from the other. She smelled him now through blood and snow, pine smoke, iron, cedar ash, and beneath it the clean bite of winter moonlight. She hated that her body recognized safety in that scent before her mind allowed it. She swallowed against a throat that felt scraped raw. I was expelled. They said I miscarried. The words trembled out in white puffs. I did not. Her belly tightened, hard and painful, and she sucked in a sharp breath. She's still here. His gaze dropped again, gentler this time, and his hand spread over the curve of her abdomen without pressing. The contact sent a crackle through both of them. He flinched as if struck, and then exhaled slowly through his nose. Little one, he murmured, voice changing into something rougher, warmer, impossible. Hold fast. As if answering him, her daughter kicked hard against his palm. Every warrior around them heard it in the silence that followed. The woman captain made a strangled sound that might have been surprise or awe. Tobias rose in one smooth motion, gathering Arabella closer against his chest, blanket and all. She should have resisted on principle. She should have clawed free before anyone could claim ownership over her life again. Instead, she sagged into his heat because she was shaking too hard to hide it. Form on me, Tobias barked. His patrol snapped into motion, wolves fanning outward in a diamond guard as they began the descent. Snow knifed sideways, but he moved through it with the sure-footed inevitability of an avalanche, one arm locked around her shoulders, the other bracing her legs so her belly stayed supported. Every few steps he glanced down at her, checking her breathing, her color, whether she was still conscious. Stay awake, he said. I'm trying. Good girl. The words should have rankled. Instead, they landed like warmth on frozen skin. She drifted in and out as they crossed a narrow ridge and dropped into a sheltered cut where black stone walls blocked the worst of the wind. At one point she clenched with another contraction. Stronger, longer, and made a helpless sound into his cloak. His mouth brushed her temple, almost a growl. Easy, not here, not now. When they reached the outer gate of Shadowfang's stronghold, horns sounded from the battlements. Iron teeth groaned open, torches flared, wolves and soldiers spilled into the courtyard and stopped dead when they saw what their king carried. A bloodied stranger in torn bridal white, a swollen belly, a snapped red cord wound around her fist, and Tobias Shadowfang looking like murder in human skin. Clear the east infirmary, he ordered. Boiling water, lamb's broth, clean linens, birch salve, wake Sarah, and no one else touches her until I say. A gray-bearded healer hurried forward with 2 assistants. Your Grace, we should assess immediately. Tobias turned his head just enough to bare fangs. I said no one touches her until I say. The healer stopped, bowed. Yes, Alpha King. Arabella should have been afraid then, watching absolute power tighten around a room. She was, a little. But when he carried her through the high doors and into a chamber warmed by a roaring hearth, he set her down with absurd care, like she was something he'd pulled from ruins and intended to keep intact. He knelt to remove her one remaining shoe. His fingers, broad and scarred, shook once before he steadied them. Arabella, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. It slid through her like another thread of heat. She blinked at him, disoriented. How do you... Your patrol hunters shouted it when they chased you to my border. His expression darkened. I heard enough. She stiffened. Then you know I'm a problem. I know you were hunted while pregnant in a blizzard. His eyes flashed gold again. The rest can wait. Steam filled the chamber carrying rosemary and wood smoke. Sarah, the senior healer, had checked the baby's heartbeat with her ear to Arabella's belly, pronounced it strong, and started to move toward Arabella's feet with salve and cloth strips. Tobias blocked her with one raised hand. I'll do it. Sarah arched a brow. Your grace, frostbite requires... I know what it requires. Not harsh, just final. Leave us. Both of you. Sarah's gaze flicked from him to Arabella, assessing. Call if bleeding worsens, she said to Arabella quietly, then inclined her head and ushered her assistants out. The door clicked shut. Arabella stared as Tobias crossed to the hearth, stripped off his gloves, and held his hands over the flames until the skin pinked with heat. He did not rush. He did not touch her until he had warmed every finger. Then he returned, crouched before her chair, and lifted her numbed foot onto his thigh with a care that made her throat tighten. This will hurt, he said. Tell me if it's too much. You don't have to. I know. He cleaned the torn skin with warm water, patient and precise, working melted blood from between her toes, checking each frostbitten patch for return of color. Pain came in bright stabs that made her hiss and grip the chair arms. Each time she tensed, his free hand rested lightly on her calf, never pinning, never claiming, only grounding. He spoke while he worked, not to fill silence but to anchor her. Can you keep broth down? She blinked. Of all questions, not whose child, not what were you accused of, not what do you bring into my court. I think so. Good. You'll sip, not gulp. A small kick thudded under her ribs. She flinched. Tobias glanced at her belly and, without asking, laid 2 warm fingers near the movement. Little wolf, he said softly, voice pitched lower than before, steady as a heartbeat. Your mother needs calm. No wrestling for now. The baby settled. Arabella stared at him, stunned. She listens. She hears tone and pulse. He resumed wrapping her foot in clean cloth. So do wolves not yet born. A laugh escaped her, wet and disbelieving. Darian never... She bit the name off like poison. Tobias did not ask. He only said, Would you like the curtains open? Moon helps some when panic rises. She looked toward the shuttered windows. The idea of seeing the sky after being buried in snow and lies made something unclench in her chest. Yes. He opened them himself. Pale winter moonlight spilled across stone, silvering the edge of the bed, the basin, his bowed head as he tied the final bandage. King's work done by King's hands. When he finished, he set broth beside her, waited while she took 2 careful sips, and nodded once as if she had passed a crucial test. You'll sleep. She almost laughed. I don't think my body remembers how. Then rest. I'll have guards outside. Her spine went rigid. No men. His answer came instantly. No men. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. No one enters unless you ask. If nightmares hit, pound once on the wall. She frowned. You'll hear that from wherever kings sleep? A shadow of grim humor touched his mouth. Try me. He left. Arabella waited for the other strike, for him to return with terms, to press advantage, to ask for gratitude measured in obedience. Instead, only quiet came, broken by distant footfalls and the crackle of hearth logs. She ate half the broth. She curled on her side around her belly and watched moonlight crawl across stone. Exhaustion dragged her under. Nightmare tore her back out. She was in Ashford Hall again, wrists bound in red cord that tightened into wire, while voices chanted, "Already lost it, already lost it." Darian stood over her with Nikolai's smile and reached for her stomach. She woke with a choking cry, fists flying. Silence answered. Then a low voice from just beyond the door. Arabella, you're in Shadowfang. You're safe. She stumbled from bed, wrapped in blankets, and yanked the door open. Tobias sat on the floor in the corridor, back against the opposite wall, boots off, sword across his knees, not posted upright like a sentinel, not inside her room. Outside, where she had control of the threshold, two female guards stood farther down the hall, deliberately turned away to give her privacy. He looked up, eyes bleary with interrupted sleep and concern he didn't bother masking. I heard you breathe wrong. Something fragile shifted inside her. You weren't joking, she whispered. No. He rose only halfway, careful not to crowd. Do you want me to call Sarah? She shook her head. No. Just stay there. He settled back down where he was. Arabella stood in the doorway for a long moment, blanket clutched to her chest, watching the most feared alpha in the north choose the cold stone floor over taking one step she hadn't invited. When she finally closed the door, her hands were still trembling, but not entirely from fear. By midday, rumors had already outrun fact. Arabella knew it from the way servants' eyes widened when she crossed the upper gallery on Sarah's arm, from the whispering knots of warriors below, from the brittle politeness of the council steward who announced, "His Grace requests your presence as witness only," as if he feared she might bite him. The council hall was carved into the mountain heart, all black pillars and iron braziers, banners hanging like nightfall from rafters. Tobias stood at the head of the long stone table, shoulders rigid beneath dark leathers. Elders ringed the room, scarred alphas, matriarchs, captains. Outsider envoys, too, among them a narrow-faced man in starfall blue who watched Arabella as if pricing livestock. She stopped 2 paces inside the doors. Female guards closed in at her flanks, exactly as promised. An elder with silver-braided hair slammed her palm on the table. This is madness. We cannot harbor a disputed pregnant exile on rumor of bond. Not rumor, Tobias said. Fact. Another elder bared his teeth. Fact can still be politically fatal. Ashford claims she miscarried. Starfall submits letters saying she courted both Darien Vale and Nikolai before approaching our border. If we shelter her, we inherit scandal and succession challenges. Arabella's stomach dropped. Forged letters. Of course. The Starfall envoy spread his hands with oily sympathy. No insult meant, Your Grace, but for stability, perhaps the woman should be surrendered to neutral custody until the child can be inspected for lineage. Inspected. The word scraped like rust down her bones. She took an involuntary step back. Tobias heard it. Every muscle in his body seemed to lock at once. Then he moved. Not toward her, but toward the center of the hall, putting himself between Arabella and the table. Say that again, he said softly. The envoy lifted his chin. I said she should be surrendered. Bone and sinew rippled under Tobias's skin. His canines dropped. Claws punched through his fingers. Half-shift slammed over him in a wave of lethal intent so sudden the nearest brazier flame bent sideways from the force of it. Any mouth in this hall, he said, voice now threaded with a growl that vibrated stone, that speaks of separating mother and child will answer to me in blood trial. No one breathed. The elder with silver braids swallowed. Your Grace, emotion cannot override law. Then hear law. Tobias's gaze swept the table like drawn steel. She crossed our ward alive, carrying. She is under my protection by right of border refuge and mate claim. Challenge either, and we settle it in the circle. Silence thickened. The Starfall envoy tried one last gamble, stepping around the table with a parchment held out. At least allow formal verification. If I may take her wrist scent for He reached toward Arabella's arm. Tobias moved faster than sight. One precise motion. Grip, twist, crack. The envoy screamed as his wrist snapped backward. Parchment fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Tobias released him, and the man dropped to his knees, clutching his arm, face gray with shock. Next hand, Tobias said, almost conversational. I remove at the elbow. No one called it excessive. Not here. Not after the warning. He turned to Captain Mara, the same woman who had found Arabella in the snow. Post 6 guard women outside Luna chambers, rotating pairs, oath-bound to her command. Any petition, inspection, or summons comes through me. Mara struck fist to chest. By your order. Tobias faced the council again, blood from the envoy's wrist bright on his knuckles. As for these letters, we verify seal wax, ink age, and witness marks before sunset. If forged, Starfall answers for libel in royal court. The elder who had argued law looked at Arabella then, not kindly, but no longer dismissive. And if they are genuine? Arabella surprised herself by stepping forward before Tobias could answer. Her voice came out rough, but steady. Then bring whoever wrote them to swear under moon oath to my face. Several heads jerked toward her. Challenge accepted in public. Tobias glanced back over his shoulder, and for one charged second, their eyes met again. The same locked line from the snow, now tempered with something new. Not possession, recognition. Meeting adjourned, he said. Chairs scraped, wolves filed out in tense clusters, dragging the moaning envoy with them. Mara's women closed around Arabella at once, efficient and unintrusive, forming a living wall as she was escorted toward the side doors. At the threshold, Tobias caught up beside her. He did not touch. Are you hurt? She looked at his blood-marked hand, then at his face. No. Good. He started to turn back to the hall, to war and paperwork and whatever kings did when threatened by neighboring alphas. Arabella heard herself speak before caution could stop her. Tobias. He paused. Her pulse jumped. Lowering her guard felt like stepping onto thawing river ice. Dangerous. Necessary. Thank you, she said quietly, for not deciding over me. For the guards. Something in his expression eased, just barely. You're not a problem to be managed, Arabella. No one had said that to her either. Not in a long time. He inclined his head, a warrior's respect rather than a ruler's command, and went back into the hall. Arabella stood there a moment longer, one palm over her daughter, listening to the distant echo of his voice rising like thunder as the doors shut. For the first time since the wedding night, she did not feel exiled from her own life. The doors had barely shut when Mara murmured, "Protected chambers?" Arabella nodded, still listening to Tobias's voice through stone, measured at first, then sharp enough to cut. She let the guard women guide her down the corridor, but halfway there a runner intercepted them, breath steaming, fist to chest. "Captain, the king requests Lady Arabella in the war room. Immediate." Mara swore under her breath. Of course he does. Arabella's pulse thudded faster. What happened? The runner glanced at the other guards, then at Arabella's belly, uneasy. We caught a second Starfall man at the lower gate. He had cipher tabs sewn into his coat and Ashford wax in his satchel. Not rumor then. Infrastructure. Mara changed direction without asking further. Stay tight, she told her women. No one touches her. No one. The war room smelled like ink, wet wool, and anger. Maps covered the central table, pack borders, trade routes, ward lines cut in red chalk. Tobias stood at the head, sleeves rolled, blood still drying on his knuckles. Beside him, a lean spy master Arabella didn't know had spread out confiscated documents under weighted knives. Sarah was there too, arms folded, because apparently no one in this stronghold intended to let Arabella out of sight for long. On the floor near the hearth knelt the second Starfall courier, wrists bound with silver thread cord. His lip was split. His eyes kept darting to Tobias and away. Tobias looked up the instant Arabella entered. The hard line of his mouth eased a fraction, then reset. Can you stand this? She lifted her chin. I asked for truth. He gave one curt nod and gestured to the table. Then hear it. The spy master, Elias, by the badge on his collar, slid one parchment toward her. Recovered from the courier's inner seam. Starfall cipher. Cracked an hour ago. Arabella read the first line and felt nausea roll through her. To Darian Vale, acting Alpha of Ashford. Maintain declaration of miscarriage across all northern routes. No deviation. Her hand tightened on the table edge. Elias continued, voice flat. There are payment notations in the margin. 3 transfers in Starfall Silver, 2 in Grain Promissory. In exchange, Ashford supplied witness statements and temple copies. Temple copies of what? Arabella asked, though she already feared she knew. Elias met her eyes. Old Moonline registries. The room went very still. Tobias's gaze sharpened. Say it plain. Elias tapped a second document, older, brittle at the folds. Your line, Arabella Ashford, traces through your mother's side to the Virel Moonline Covenant. Defunct in practice, still valid in right. If your child is female and survives to first moon naming, she can be invoked as claimant in kingship disputes, where blood legitimacy is contested. Arabella stared at him. That's folklore? Folklore becomes law when desperate men need a crown, Tobias said. The bound courier made a low, defeated laugh. Nikolai doesn't need the babe alive long-term. Just alive long enough for binding rights and public claim. He planned to rescue the discarded bride, force bloodbinding, then challenge Shadowfang's succession as protector of Moonline issue. Sarah went white with fury. Mara's hand dropped to her knife. Arabella felt cold move through her marrow. He bribed Ashford to say she was dead so Tobias wouldn't look for me. The courier shrugged as much as bindings allowed. Dead babies don't start wars, living ones do. Tobias crossed the room in 2 strides and hauled the man up by his collar. And the forged letters? The courier winced, feet barely touching stone. Phase 2, make her look faithless. Tarnish the bond, divide your elders. If your court doubts her, she stands alone. Easier to take. Tobias's claws flashed at his fingertips before he mastered them. How many inside my walls are bought? I don't know names. The courier's breath hitched. I swear it. I only run packets. Elias said quietly. He's likely telling truth. Low-level asset. Tobias dropped the man hard enough to rattle teeth, then turned away, before rage chose for him. He braced both palms on the map table, head bowed. For one taut moment, the Alpha King looked less like an invincible ruler and more like a male calculating how many fronts he could hold at once. When he finally spoke, the words were for the room, but his eyes were on Arabella. Nikolai wants chaos, divided court, and access to her before birthrights. He gets none of it. His voice hardened. Seal inner gates. Audit all messengers. Any correspondence regarding Arabella or the child routes through Elias and me. Mara thumped fist to chest. Done. Tobias added, and send riders to retrieve the Ashford midwife, Leora, under royal summons. If she signed false death testimony, she answers in public. Arabella's breath caught. Leora alive meant proof might be dragged into daylight. The courier spat blood onto the floor. You're already late. He's seated your council with scandal. By the Winter Oath Festival, half your allies will be asking if your mate is a liar carrying another Alpha's bastard. Tobias didn't even glance at him. Then they'll ask with broken teeth. Even now, terror found room for an almost hysterical spark of relief. He meant it. Elias gathered the documents. Your Grace, one more item. A schedule marker. Starfall notation references, Oath Night extraction route. Ravine south of Torchfield. Festival. Extraction. Nikolai wasn't merely slandering her, he was planning logistics. Arabella pressed her palm over her belly as her daughter shifted, restless. He's coming himself. Tobias met her gaze. Yes. And this time, there was no possibility of pretending the danger was abstract. By evening, the stronghold felt different, tighter, listening. Guards doubled at stairwells. Kitchen staff were searched before entering service halls. Couriers waited under watch while seals were checked with heated needles. Everywhere Arabella went, whispers followed. Not cruel, mostly, but charged. Some smelled like fear, some like curiosity. a few like old resentment sharpened by new politics. She understood too well how fast narratives hardened. At supper, she sat in a side alcove off the great hall with Mara and two guard women, while Tobias presided at the high table, fielding challenges couched as concerns. What if Starfall invokes truce law and requests audience with the woman? One visiting beta asked. She has a name, Tobias said. Another elder, jaw tight. If this child carries moonline rights, every pack here becomes a stakeholder. You cannot expect blind compliance. No, Tobias answered. I expect lawful conduct. The elder snorted. Law bends for kings. Tobias's smile held no warmth. Not this law. Arabella focused on her broth and forced it down slowly like he'd instructed. The mate bond hummed faintly all night, a silver awareness of where he stood in the room, when his temper spiked, when exhaustion bled through the steel. Sometimes his gaze found her across torchlight and noise, just long enough to check she was upright and breathing. Each look tightened and soothed her in equal measure. After supper, Elias brought sealed packets for Tobias to review in the library, and, after a hesitation, asked Arabella, "Would you identify Ashford's sign hands if shown?" "Yes," she said. "Most of them." So she sat at a long cedar table under lamplight while Tobias and Elias worked through intercepted letters. Some were obvious forgeries, ink too fresh, signatures traced. Others were clever enough to make her doubt herself for a heartbeat before memory corrected it. Darian's forged note had called her Bella. He had never once used the nickname in private, only in public, when he wanted to sound tender. "Burn that one," she said, sliding it away. Tobias fed it to the brazier without reading a second line. Near midnight, after Elias left, Tobias remained across from her with 3 unopened letters and a crease between his brows deep enough to cut skin. Arabella rubbed her sternum where the bond had gone tight again. "You should sleep," he said without looking up. "So should you." "I will." "You're lying." His mouth twitched despite himself. "I'm prioritizing." "Badly?" That earned her a full glance. Tired, surprised, faintly amused. "You've been in my fortress 2 days and already challenged my command structure." "Your command structure is trying to survive on rage and black tea." He leaned back, studying her. "And what do you run on?" The answer came out before she polished it. Spite. Maternal terror. You. Silence fell heavy and intimate. Heat climbed her throat. Tobias set his pen down very carefully. "Arabella." A sharp kick rolled across her abdomen. She inhaled and pressed her hand there. "She's doing somersaults." He was beside her chair in 2 steps, then paused, asking with his eyes. She nodded. His palm settled over hers on her belly. The baby kicked again, hard enough to jolt both their hands. Tobias exhaled a rough, startled laugh. A sound so unguarded it pierced her cleanly. "She has your timing," he murmured, "interrupts every argument. You've known her 20 minutes, and I'm already outnumbered." The attraction between them had become its own weather system, low thunder, constant pressure. Arabella was acutely aware of his hand, his heat, the nearness of his mouth if she tilted her chin. Her wolf pressed forward, wanting scent, touch, completion. Her fear rose with it, old and sharp, promises rot. Bonds can be weaponized. Don't forget. She shifted back first. Tobias removed his hand immediately. No protest, no wounded male pride, just respect. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For?" "Stopping when I need space." His expression went still. "That is not a favor. That is the minimum." Something in her chest cracked a little wider. The quiet moment came later. Not in the grand rooms, but in the nursery tower no one used in winter. Arabella found it by accident when sleep refused her again. One guard escorted her up the winding stair at her request, then waited outside as she stepped into moonlight and dust. The room had once been made for pups of rank. Small carved bed frames against one wall, faded murals of running wolves, Shelves with wooden toys worn smooth by hands long grown. Frost traced the inside of the high windows. The whole place smelled like cedar and old lullabies. She stood in the center, one hand on her back against a dull ache, and let herself imagine her daughter here in spring, wrapped in wool, safe enough to cry loudly. Couldn't sleep either. Tobias's voice came from the doorway. He held no weapon, only 2 steaming mugs. He crossed only when she nodded. I used to hide up here during council feasts, he said, handing her 1 mug. Too many people trying to assess my teeth. Arabella huffed a laugh. Did they succeed? Mostly they learned I bite. The tea was mint and honey. She cradled the warmth and stared at the painted wall where a mother wolf curled around 3 pups. I keep waiting for this to vanish, she admitted. The room. The guards. You being... this. She gestured helplessly. Present? Kind without being weak. Her mouth twisted. I didn't know those could coexist in an alpha male. They usually don't. She looked at him sidelong. Why do they in you? He was quiet a long moment. Outside, wind brushed the tower like distant surf. Because my mother was exiled while carrying my younger brother, he said at last. Not by her mate, by his council. Political risk. They put her out in thaw flood season and called it legal. His jaw tightened. She lived. Barely. My brother didn't. Arabella's breath left her in a shaken whisper. Tobias. I was 13, old enough to remember every face that voted. His gaze met hers, raw and level. So when people call your safety a liability, understand, I am not calm because I don't feel fury. I am calm because fury already took enough. The room blurred. She set her mug down before she dropped it and reached for him without planning to. His arms came around her carefully, leaving space for her belly, holding her like she was breakable and fierce at once. She pressed her forehead to his chest and let one silent sob shake out before pride could strangle it. I'm so tired of being evidence, she whispered into his shirt. Proof, claim, scandal. I just want to be her mother. You are, he said against her hair. And if the world wants paperwork, we'll drown it in paperwork after we keep you alive. She laughed wetly. Romantic? I contain multitudes. She leaned back enough to see his face and surprised herself by cupping his jaw. Scar under thumb, rough stubble, heat. He stilled as if the touch mattered more than any oath. I'm afraid of needing you, she said. His eyes softened devastatingly. Need me and still keep your teeth, Arabella. I'm not asking for less of you. For a suspended heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. She wasn't sure whether she would flinch or follow. A horn blast split the night. One long note from the lower ward. Alarm. They broke apart instantly. Mara's voice echoed up the stairwell, hard and urgent. Your Grace! South kitchen's breached. 2 intruders down. 1 escaped toward inner women's wing. Tobias was already moving. Stay with the guard. Arabella grabbed his wrist. No, if he's running inner wing, he's running at me. Another horn answered, closer now. Shouts rose in the courtyard below. Somewhere glass shattered. Tobias swore. Mara, lock tower and... A second guard stumbled into the doorway, blood on her sleeve. Captains pinned at the east passage. We found a sedative dart in the nursery door downstairs. They were waiting for her route. For her route. Arabella felt the world narrow to a knife point. Nikolai had men inside the stronghold already, not at gates, at her corridors, at women's wing doors. From below came a scream, short, cut off, and the unmistakable crash of iron bars forced open. Tobias shoved Arabella behind him, claws breaking through skin. They're not extracting from south, he said, voice gone cold lethal. They're driving us there while the real team comes up the tower. As if summoned by the words, bootsteps thundered on the stair beneath them. Too many. Too fast. Coming straight for the only exit. Bootsteps hammered up the spiral stair, iron on stone, close enough that Arabella could count them by rhythm. 6. No. 8. Tobias shoved her behind the nursery's carved wardrobe and ripped the sword from his back in the same motion. Mara! He roared down the stairwell. Seal the lower turn! A flash answered. Mara's axe head in torchlight. Then a grunt. A body hitting steps. And the stink of wolfsbane smoke curling upward. Shields up! A male voice barked below. Take the king's head if you can. The woman alive. Alive. Arabella's blood iced. Not an assassination, an extraction. The first intruder burst through the doorway in dark leathers with starfall blue stitched under the collar. Tobias met him mid-charge, blade through throat before the man finished inhaling. The body dropped. A second came low with a hooked knife. Tobias kicked his knee sideways with a crack and drove him into the wall hard enough to split stone plaster. More poured in behind, crossbows raised. Down! Tobias snapped. Arabella dropped to her knees as bolts hissed overhead. One shattered a toy shelf. Another buried in the doorframe inches from her ear, glass vial tied to the shaft. It broke on impact and frothed green. Sedative. Tobias moved like violence made flesh. Steel, claws, blood. He took a slash across his forearm and didn't slow, disarmed one attacker, and used the man as cover against 2 more bolts. But there were too many bodies in too little room, and every one of them fought with one objective: get past him to her. A masked wolf lunged around Tobias's flank and caught Arabella's ankle. She screamed, kicked, connected with his jaw, then grabbed the nearest thing at hand, a carved wooden wolf from the toy shelf, and smashed it into his temple. He snarled and dragged harder. Hold her! She felt her hip wrench, pain flaring down her back and into her belly. A contraction clenched on top of panic, bright and brutal. No, not now. She clawed at the floor for purchase and her fingers found the old brass ring set into stone near the wardrobe base. Memory hid in a lightning flash, a nursery trap her nursemaid once warned pups never to pull. Emergency drop gate for raids. Arabella yanked the ring with both hands. Iron shrieked. A heavy grate slammed down between the front half of the nursery and the back alcove where she knelt, severing the room. The masked intruder's arm got caught under it. He howled as bone crushed. Tobias looked over, shocked for half a heartbeat, then bared his teeth in savage approval. Good girl! The grate bought seconds, not safety. One intruder vaulted onto a chest, aiming to climb over. Another hacked at the bars. Below, Mara's voice thundered, "Shadowfang guard, with me!" Steel collided on the stair. A guard woman appeared in the doorway, bleeding from the brow, and drove a spear through the climber's back. "King!" she shouted. "They've got archers in the courtyard and a fire in South Kitchens. Diversion confirmed." An arrow punched through the high nursery window and clipped Tobias's shoulder. He staggered, snapped the shaft, and kept fighting. Arabella crawled backward as another contraction seized her so hard her vision whited out. She tasted copper. Her daughter kicked violently, distressed. "Easy, little moon," she gasped, palm over her belly. "Stay with me." A voice drifted from the stairwell below the fighting, smooth and amused, amplified by stone. "Is this really how you greet guests, Shadowfang?" Nikolai Starfall stepped into view 2 landings down, immaculate in white winter fur, silver rings bright against his gloves. Blood spattered his boots from his own men. He didn't even look at the dead. His smile landed on Arabella through the bars. "There you are." Tobias surged for the stair. 3 intruders slammed into him to pin him back. Nikolai lifted one hand lazily. "Careful. If I wanted her dead, your tower would be empty already." His eyes flicked to Arabella's belly. "I only need her borrowed." Arabella's wolf snarled under her skin. Nikolai tilted his head. "Come willingly, Arabella, and I'll keep your child breathing." "Touch her," Tobias said, voice feral. "And I will feed you your own spine." Nikolai laughed. "You won't catch me in your own halls, let alone mine." He stepped backward, signaling retreat. His raiders disengaged in practiced bursts, smoke vials, thrown oil, a final crossbow volley. Tobias took one bolt to the thigh and still gutted the shooter before he fell. Then Starfall wolves were gone, pounding down the outer stairs into blizzard dark, leaving blood, sedative stench, and chaos behind. Mara's squad flooded the nursery seconds later. Sarah crashed in after them with a medical satchel, skidding to Arabella's side. "Lie back. Now." Sarah's hands were already at Arabella's abdomen, counting the spacing of the pain. Her face tightened. Contractions every 7 minutes. Stress-induced, not active labor yet. We can still slow them if she rests. Arabella pushed herself up on shaking arms. "He was here." "I know," Tobias said. He knelt in front of her despite blood running down his temple and shoulder, despite a bolt wound still leaking through torn leather. His eyes were pure gold now, wolf-furious and focused. "From this point on," he said, each word bitten off, "you do not leave secured rooms. Not for counsel. Not for ritual. Not for anything." Arabella met that feral stare and heard, under command, raw terror. He almost lost her. But she had seen Nikolai's face. She had heard his confidence. He wasn't done. Neither was she. 3 nights later, Winter Oath Festival lit the Shadowfang torch field in a ring of fire and snow. Drums rolled. Banners snapped. Visiting packs gathered in ceremonial circles to renew treaties under Moon Witness. Every eye in the province would be on that field. And Arabella stood in ceremonial white, not hidden in Birthing Wing, not behind locked doors. At her shoulder, Mara muttered, "He is going to lose his mind." "He already did that in the nursery," Arabella said. She fastened the silver clasp at her throat with fingers that trembled only a little. Beneath the fur-lined cloak, her belly was high and tight. Contractions had eased but not vanished. Sarah had called her reckless in 6 inventive ways. Elias had called her plan operationally unsound. Tobias had called it forbidden. Then she had shown him the stolen parchment. 2 nights after the tower attack, while his court scrambled defenses, Arabella had insisted on one covert ride with Mara and Elias to Ashford's border shrine, where archive chests were moved before Oath Festival for public witness recitations. She had crawled through a crypt tunnel she knew from childhood dares, cut her forearm on old stone, and stolen back the one record Nikolai and Darian had never expected her to touch. Midwife Leora's original moon oath, bearing date, blood print, and sworn paternity witness from the night Arabella first conceived. Truth, inked before the lies began. Now that parchment was strapped flat against her ribs. Tobias strode into her chamber in full battle leathers, cloak thrown back, fury radiating off him like heat. "No." Arabella turned to face him. "Yes." "You are having contractions." "I am also bait." His jaw flexed. "I can bait him without risking you." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You can guard me. You cannot replace me. Nikolai wants me visible and vulnerable. Give him visible. Let him choose the moment. We choose the ground." He glared. She held it. Then, more quietly, "He expects me to hide and panic. I'm done being managed by men who weaponize my fear." Something shifted in Tobias's expression, not agreement yet, but respect, sharpening into trust. "What's the mechanism?" he asked finally. Arabella held up a polished silver festival cup. "He can't resist touching what he thinks he owns. At the tribute toast, I pass this through Starfall Envoy line as custom. I've scored the stem with moon resin from his own seized packets. It binds skin oil and scent for tracking." She met Tobias's eyes. "When he moves on me, I track him. You strike where I lead. You are not tracking anyone in this weather." She gave him a flat look. "Have you met me?" A beat. 2. Tobias exhaled through his nose, surrendering only to her resolve. "You do not break formation unless extraction is live." "I'll try." "That is not reassuring." Mara cleared her throat in the doorway. Torchfield set. Strike teams in ravine positions. Tobias took Arabella's face in both hands, forehead to hers, breath rough. "If labor starts, we abort." "If labor starts," she whispered, We finish fast. The festival opened with oath fire and ancient words. Packs knelt and rose. Blades touched palms. Blood drops hissed in braziers. Snow fell in thin silver threads. Arabella moved through the ceremonial circuit on Tobias's arm, guarded by Mara's women and watched by everyone. Whispers rippled like wind through grass. There, Starfall delegation, ringed in blue and white. Nikolai stood among them as if he had every right to breathe her air, smiling at neighboring alphas while his gaze kept sliding back to her mouth, her throat, her belly. When the tribute toast began, Arabella took the silver cup from a steward and lifted it first to Tobias, then, by custom, to the rival line. Nikolai Starfall, she said clearly. He stepped forward, delighted, and closed his gloved hand around the stem exactly where she had scored it. His thumb pressed bare metal where the glove was split at the seam. Got you. He tipped the cup, drank, and handed it back with a mocking bow. To second chances. Arabella smiled with all her teeth. To truth. The first blast came from the North Pyres, not an explosion, signal horn, wrong pattern. Then torches went out in 3 sectors at once, plunging half the field into darkness. Wolves shouted. Someone screamed. Arrows rained from the ridge. Down! Mara roared, shoving Arabella behind a stone oath pillar. Nikolai vanished into the chaos. Tobias was already shifting, bones snapping, fur surging across skin. His wolf hit the snow at full speed, enormous and black-gray, and launched toward the ridge with strike teams at his flanks. Arabella clutched the scented cup, inhaled hard. Pine smoke, blood, wet fur, and beneath it, sharp silver musk threaded with bitter clove. Nikolai. He was moving south, toward the ravine extraction route. Another contraction seized her, stronger than before, folding her at the waist. Sarah grabbed her arm. That's 5 minutes. You're done. Infirmary now. Arabella shook her off. No. Arabella? No. She dropped the cloak, shifted. Pain tore through her body in a hot white wave, bones reforming under labor pressure, skin splitting and sealing in seconds. Her wolf burst free, lean and pale as winter ash, flank trembling but eyes locked. She bolted. Behind her, Mara cursed and gave chase with 4 guards. Strike Team C, on me! Protect the Luna! Snow slashed her muzzle as she hit the ravine lip. The scent trail was fresh, arrogant, zigzagging to shake pursuit. Arabella ignored decoys and followed the resin-marked thread. Halfway down, Starfall scouts peeled from cover. She didn't engage. She threw her head back and gave 3 sharp yips, then 1 broken trill. The old Starfall boar hunt recall she had learned years ago listening at Darian's strategy tables. The scouts froze instinctively and answered before they could stop themselves. There, positions lit in sound. Shadowfang strike wolves surged from blind pockets in the storm and slammed into exposed Starfall flank. Screams echoed off ice walls. Arabella drove forward through the gap she'd opened. At the ravine basin, Nikolai waited with 6 elites and a sled rigged for transport. He shifted to wolf form as she skidded in, massive white male, scar down one shoulder, eyes bright with triumph. Clever bitch, he growled, voice half-wolf. Still came alone. Arabella's sides heaved, another contraction clenched, she nearly stumbled. Not alone. Tobias crashed into the basin from above like falling stone, flanked by black-furred guards. Wolves collided in a whirl of teeth, snow, and blood. Nikolai drove for Tobias's throat. Arabella shifted back to human mid-fight, breath ragged, gown torn, one hand on her belly and the other ripping the parchment packet from inside her bodice. "Stop!" she screamed, voice cutting through battle. "Stop and hear oath!" No one listened until she stepped directly between the 2 alphas. Tobias skidded, snarling, inches from her back. Nikolai circled, foam at his jaws, furious. "Move," Tobias growled. "No." Arabella lifted the parchment over her head. "You wanted public claim, Nikolai? You get public truth." Mara's surviving guards ringed the basin. Elders and festival witnesses were arriving at the rim, drawn by horns and fight noise. Elias shoved through with a bound, shaking figure in healer robes. Leora. Arabella thrust the parchment at her. Read it. Out loud. Now. Leora's hands shook so hard the page rattled. She saw Darian being dragged in chains behind Elias and broke into sobs. Read, Arabella said, steel in every syllable. Leora swallowed and began. I, Leora Fenn, sworn midwife of Ashford, testify by moon witness that Arabella Ashford conceived under fated bond with Darian Vale on first thaw, witnessed by blood scent and pulse right. Her voice cracked. She forced it steady. No miscarriage occurred prior to exile. Any declaration otherwise is false under oath. Gasps rippled along the ravine rim. Darian shouted, She lies! She was paid! Elias backhanded him into silence and held up ledgers of Starfall transfers. Arabella faced Nikolai, who had shifted human again, blood running from his mouth, eyes wild with hate. You buried me alive in lies, she said, voice carrying in the snow-hushed basin. Now be buried by truth. Nikolai spat red at her feet. A discarded bride cannot rule. He lunged. Arabella sidestepped on instinct, hooked his foreleg with her shin as he shifted mid-pounce, and drove her shoulder into his chest. He hit the ice hard. Tobias was on him instantly, jaws clamping his shoulder in wolf form and pinning him so violently the basin rock cracked. Nikolai screamed and clawed, trapped. Tobias shifted just enough to speak around blood and fury. She already chose to fight, more than you ever dared. Then he took Nikolai's throat in a single execution bite. Bone gave. Blood steamed black on snow. The white wolf went still. Silence fell, broken only by wind and Arabella's ragged breathing. Then pain ripped through her lower body, different this time. Final. Sarah dropped to her knees beside her. Labor. Now. Tobias was human before the word finished, covered in blood not his own, eyes snapping from corpse to Arabella with naked terror. She's crowning, Sarah barked. Get blankets, hot water. And if anyone says one political word in the next hour, I will personally poison them. She birthed her daughter in a field tent lit by oath fire and moon, not in a gilded birthing wing. In battle leathers and torn white silk, gripping Tobias's hand hard enough to bruise. Mara stood guard at the flap with blood on her cheek and axe in hand. Sarah commanded like a war general. Push with the pain, not against it. I am pushing. Then push like you mean to bite someone. Arabella did. The final contraction tore a scream from her throat and then suddenly, release. A thin, outraged cry filled the tent. Sarah laughed, breathless. Female, strong lungs, moon save us all. Tobias made a sound Arabella had never heard from him, half sob, half prayer. He cut the cord with shaking fingers and laid their daughter on Arabella's chest, slick and warm and impossibly real. Tiny mouth, dark damp hair, fists already furious. Hello, little moon, Arabella whispered, crying openly now. You stayed. The baby rooted, found skin, quieted. Tobias knelt beside them, blood, sweat, and tears on his face, and touched one finger to their daughter's back, like he couldn't believe permission had been granted. Name? Sarah asked softly. Arabella looked at Tobias. He looked at her. Lyra, they said together, then laughed through tears. Outside, the winter wind carried the first long howl of victory. 2 nights later, after Lyra had fed and finally fallen asleep in a cradle near the hearth, Tobias asked Arabella to meet him in the moon court. Snow glittered in the open-roofed stone circle. Braziers burned low. No council, no witnesses, only them and the winter sky. Tobias went to one knee before her. The sight stole her breath more surely than any command ever had. He held out his hands, palms up, empty. Arabella Ashford, he said, voice steady despite the tremor she could feel through the bond. Will you take my mark as I take yours? No demand. No decree. A question. Her wolf pressed forward, fierce and joyful. Arabella stepped closer until his breath warmed her bare throat. "Yes," she whispered. "If you take mine in return." His eyes flashed gold. "Gladly." He rose slowly, giving her every second to step back. She didn't. She tilted her head, exposing the curve where neck met shoulder, pulse jumping under skin. "Mine?" he asked. "Last check." "Yours," she answered. "Mate." His mouth found her skin, lips first, then teeth. The bite landed at the junction of neck and shoulder, sharp, piercing pain that flared white through her body. She gasped and gripped his forearms. Heat followed immediately, molten and electric, pouring from the wound down her spine and out to her fingertips. The silver bond that had been a taut line since the snowstorm suddenly split open into a river. Memories, instinct, emotion flooding both directions at once. Her terror in the blizzard, his panic on the tower stair, her stubborn, scorching will, his reverence, dark and absolute. Lyra's first cry threading through all of it like moonlight. Pain transformed, turned to a deep, aching pleasure that settled in her bones like belonging. Tobias groaned against her skin, marking complete, and held her as if the earth had shifted under him. Arabella pulled back enough to bare her own teeth. "My turn," she whispered. She pushed his shirt aside, palms flat to his chest over the scarred muscle above his heart. His pulse hammered against her hand. "Mine?" she asked. He bowed his head. "Yours, mate." She bit. His skin gave under her fangs, hot blood on her tongue, his whole body shuddering as her mark took. Power surged back through the bond, his wolf rising to meet hers, not overpowering but synchronized, two currents locking into one rhythm. The moon court seemed to brighten, their scents braided, pine smoke and winter iron with her wild thyme and frost. They clung to each other, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "No more exile," Arabella whispered. "No more fear," Tobias answered. "Only us," they said together. "Mine," he murmured against her mouth. "Yours," she breathed back. "Mate." The word settled like a final stone in a foundation that would hold. The binding summit convened at first light in the great hall, every major pack represented. Arabella stood beside Tobias on the dais with Lyra in her arms, and her fresh mark visible above her collar. No one in the chamber could pretend uncertainty now. Elias presented evidence first, seized ledgers, forged letters, cipher packets, witness chains. Leora testified under moon oath, weeping but unflinching. Darian Vale and Elder Bram were brought in irons from Ashford, stripped of rank insignia. Darian tried one last sneer. "You can't let a woman rewrite pack law because she cried prettily in snow." Arabella descended the dais before Tobias could answer. She stopped an arm's length from Darian and spoke so every corner heard her. "I'm rewriting it because you proved what men like you do when law leaves room for cruelty." She turned to the assembly. "No pregnant wolf will ever again be exiled, declared childless, or medically pronounced without two verified witness rights, one healer oath, one independent pack witness, entered into shared archive under royal seal." Murmurs. Then, from the silver-braided elder who had challenged her first, seconded. One by one, fists struck chests around the hall. Seconded. Seconded. By oath, seconded. Tobias's voice rolled over the chamber. By king's authority and council assent, enacted. Ashford's sentence followed. Reparations in grain, silver, and winter labor for 5 years. Public retraction of the miscarriage lie in all territories. Darian and Bram banished to outer mines under guard. Leora, judged coerced but complicit, was stripped of office and assigned to healer service in refugee camps under Sarah's oversight. Mara was named Royal Guard Commander before the whole hall. She looked annoyed by applause and secretly pleased. Sarah accepted the new post of High Healer with a glare that dared anyone argue. Elias received expanded authority over Interpack records to prevent future forgeries. Then Tobias took Arabella's hand and led her to the central stone. "Arabella Ashford Shadowfang," the herald called, "by bond, by blood, by witness and law, do you accept the mantle of High Luna and co-ruler of these united pacts?" Arabella looked at the crowd that had once been accusation and now waited in fierce silence. She adjusted Lyra against her shoulder and lifted her chin. "I accept," she said, "as guardian of law, mother of this realm's heirs, and wolf who was not buried." The hall erupted in howls. On a winter morning bright as cut glass, Arabella stood on the citadel balcony with Lyra bundled in white fur against her chest. Below, courtyards filled with wolves from every banner color. Shadowfang black, Ashford green now unarmed, even Starfall survivors sworn under new regency. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, smoke rose from cookfires. No one shouted slurs, no one looked away. Tobias came up behind her, wrapped one arm around both of them, and rested his chin on her marked shoulder. "Cold?" he asked. "Happy," she said. Lyra made a small grumbling noise and latched onto her knuckle with startling strength. Tobias laughed softly and kissed the top of their daughter's head. In the square below, Mara raised her fist. The first howl rose, deep, steady. Allegiance, not accusation. Another answered, then 100, then thousands, echoing off mountain walls until the whole valley sang. Arabella closed her eyes and let the sound move through the completed bond. Her wolf, his wolf, their child between them, the realm remade in law and blood and stubborn love. Once, snow had meant exile. Now, it meant home.